Africa has been labelled the most unequal society in the world, and to many in the electorate, politicians aren't as concerned about citizens as they should be. This could be a recipe for disaster. So how does a country go about thinking itself out of this rut? Well, political commentator Oscar Van Heerden has penned a piece on this, analysing South Africa's national state of depression. Oscar, thank you so much for your time this evening. I mean, just reading the analysis, and how you often refer to the state of South Africa's affairs, to the depression and a state of just pessimism almost that the country finds itself in. And one wonders, Oscar, this is certainly not within the last 9 years. Surely this has been coming for even possibly the last 27 years or so, because maybe the issues that we had not dealt with adequately enough in the beginning that have just now snowballed into what we see now manifesting in society. Case in point, the level of inequality that exists.
Thanks, Faith. The thing is that obviously, as we are all aware, this state of depression, the state that we are in, is certainly not something that started only 27 years ago. We come from a very brutal past where there's been state suppression and where we have been dealing with racist policies and so on, being dehumanized. And the likes. And so when we come into democracy, we already have that baggage that we come with from our dark past. And then, of course, to try and build a country, build a nation, is no easy task. And amidst all of that, you then also get a COVID pandemic, which just creates havoc in terms of social relations amongst people. And I think that this is all these factors gives a sense of pessimism and depression within our country. And as a result, people are finding it very difficult to see light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, and the people that were supposed to provide perhaps that light at the end of the tunnel, Oscar, were those who were, mandated to lead us, those that we elected to be our representatives, to be our leaders in time of crises. And speaking of one such point, I mean, you make reference to the article that it's so no surprise that when President Cyril Ramaphosa gave his account on his knowledge and the extent of his involvement in the state capture at the Zondo Commission, that most of us simply dismissed it as hogwash. So it almost appears as though where we were placing our confidence, we were placing our hope, in this case, those that are supposed to be leading us, at some stage we also find ourselves being disappointed by even them.
Well, the thing is that we are beginning to realize as a country, as citizens of South Africa, that we cannot simply abdicate the responsibility of creating an equal society, a better society, to the hands of politicians. I think that slowly but surely, if we look at the development and strength of civil society over the last few years, as you remember, Faith, civil society was very strong under apartheid, fighting the apartheid system. Somehow that disappeared post-1994. But in recent years, we've seen the emergence of civil society and a much more active citizenry, where people are saying that, yes, there is a certain amount of responsibility in the hands of our government, but as citizens, we too need to take ownership and need to begin to make our contribution to creating a better society. And we saw it recently post the lootings and the destruction, people coming together and saying, we are going to clean up, we are sending a strong message that we don't tolerate this kind of behavior.
How do we get out of this depressive state, Oscar, in your opinion, as you're looking at, the current state of affairs in the country and you're observing the negativity that seems to have engulfed most of us, further exacerbated, of course, by COVID-19 pandemic. But if we were to diagnose ourselves out of this, how do we get out of this state of depression?
Well, I think that, we simply shouldn't expect a magic wand. And one particular incident and all our problems are going to disappear. No, I think we take one bite size at a time to try and deal with this huge elephant. And here I'm referring to bites like, for example, we are in a COVID pandemic. Now is not really the time to express anti-vax attitudes. We should really get jabs in our arms in order to combat this virus and this pandemic. I think that's the first step. The second step is we must, of course, the ideal is that we want a strong, a big economy so that we can create jobs. Now, this is easier said than done, we've seen over the years. And so in the absence of getting to that ideal state, which is for a growing economy to create jobs and so forth, and to restore dignity, we have to give the poorest of the poor some measure of cash in hand. We need some form of a social wage to offset the extreme poverty that is being experienced by our people out there. So that's another bite. And the third bite is, obviously, government needs to govern properly. They need to implement policies. They need to deal with governance issues in the SOEs, in government departments. It's not good enough for Minister Fikile Mbalula to just simply say there's lots of corruption in the department. What is it that he is doing to rid the department of that corruption so that they can begin to implement strong policies? And that is what we need to do, good governance from government as well. And of course, finally, the contribution of the private sector and organized labor. You know, organized labor simply cannot continue to demand higher wages when, in fact, we are having a serious debt to GDP crisis in the country.
Yeah. And, you know, when it comes to the citizenship and the citizenry itself, where does our role come in? Should we not be demanding more accountability, whether from private sector, from public sector, from government's perspective, just demanding more for ourselves and perhaps demanding more accountability in the way in which this country is governed? And many people watching this will probably say, okay, I want more accountability, but where do I actually start? How do I demand more from my country as well as more from my government?
Absolutely. I think that we've seen in the 2016 local government elections that the electorate have begun to realize the power they have through the vote. Certain metros were lost to the governing party, and it was a clear message that was being sent by voters. And so I think, yes, we need to demand for better accountability, more transparency to try and avoid corrupt practices and malfeasance, but at the same time, we also not only have to be whistleblowers and keep an eye on government, but we must become active in our own sort of way, you know, in our communities, do our best to try and transform our society in any small measure possible.
Oscar, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Oscar Van Heerden, their political commentator, just giving us the state of depression that the country finds itself in. How do we get ourselves out of the rut that we're currently in? Those are some sentiments from him. While still